I suspect we'll have more people joining as we go on. Um, but I think it would be best to go ahead. Um, Hi everybody. This is going to be our first coffee hour. We're going to talk about the Moon Treaty. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. Um, we'll have our panelists introduce themselves, have a quick topic overview for anyone who doesn't know about the Moon Treaty, then move into discussion questions and have a Q&A. So um, any questions you have, just pop them in the chat at any point and we'll come back to them. Um, yeah, so if our lovely panel can introduce themselves, we'll go left to right. Um, Take it away.
Thanks. And Toby, thank you for inviting myself along and to speak today. So my name is Dr. Nic Ross. My background and my PhD research was in astrophysics and actually cosmology. But I also basically have an interest in anything space and indeed did a space law master's degree at Northumbria University in the UK a few years ago, focusing on space sustainability, but have deep interests in, again, all things related to space sustainability, and obviously in lunar space.
Thank you. Lovely to have you.
Yeah, I guess I'll go next. Hi, everyone. I am Teja. I work for a satellite operator and I'm based in Munich. I deal with regulatory affairs in how to license our space segment in order for us to be able to operate across the globe. And my interest in lunar exploration actually stems from my study years as well. I wrote a master's thesis about how the moon and other parts of the outer space could potentially be territorialized by function, not so much to circumvent the non-appropriation principle. And I was invited very kindly by Toby to be a part of this panel precisely because of that. Toby, namely, used to be my mentee during the SJC mentoring program, and we discussed this topic very often. So I'm very happy that I can be here and weigh in on what's currently going on there.
Thank you so much.
So good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me well. I'm João. I'm a guest lecturer in international law at the Nova School of Social Sciences in Lisbon. And I co-coordinate the Space Law Research Center at the university. I'm also a PhD candidate, and my research is focused on space resource activities and benefit sharing mechanisms. And I wrote my master thesis actually on the Moon Agreement and the principle of common heritage of humankind. So yeah, this is why I'm here today. And Toby, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much. Brilliant to have all three of you. Um, yeah, I think we'll move on to a quick overview, as quick as you can be, about a treaty. So the Moon Treaty is all about the moon, but it's also about other celestial bodies aside from Earth. Um, I put a couple of key aspects of the Moon Treaty on the slides here, such as it must be used for peaceful purposes. Um, Resources are defined as the common heritage of mankind. Um, and dealing with preservation of the moon's environment and the principles of equality in international law throughout the use and exploration of the moon. I imagine we'll discuss more of the other ones as we go throughout the discussion, but I thought these were the main ones to make a point of, the main ones that people debate and discuss. But yeah, that's in a nutshell the Moon Treaty. So I think we can move on to a discussion. All three of you just feel free to jump in when you have any thoughts. We'll keep it very laid back. Um, yeah, I think we can go for it. So I think the best question to start on would be talking about the biggest weakness of the Moon Treaty. Um, it's considered a failed treaty, because of its lack of popularity. What I'd be interested in your thoughts, each of you, as to why you think that is, and what you think the biggest weakness of the treaty itself would be.
I'll be happy to start, to be the first one to weigh in on this one. I think weakness is a bit of a strong word. I would just maybe say that there was a misalignment in values at the time. We had two big camps, so to say, of countries. Ones that were just coming into their, let's say, awareness of how much they want to weigh in the global playing field. Those were the countries that used to be considered as the so-called global south, which were also the biggest proponents of the common heritage of mankind, precisely because they were afraid that the race for space is going to become a first come, first serve kind of situation. And they didn't want to be too late to that, but they knew that they did not have the necessary means to partake at that point in time. So that's why this is reflected, I believe, not just in the Moon Treaty, which was conceptualized in like the early 80s, but also in other treaties that came to be at around that time. For example, like the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas, which also includes this concept. On the other hand, we, however, had these countries that were already either spacefaring countries or spacefaring countries to be, that did not want to limit themselves at a point where they knew that they might have the capabilities to explore space and exploit it relatively soon, but also did not exactly know when and how and under which conditions. So I think they did not want to sign and ratify something that would potentially curb that innovation and enthusiasm and the know-how that they were developing. So I think there was this conflict of sorts between the two. And that's exactly what's shown in the number of the countries that actually ratified it up until now, and the geographical position where they're based. Not every single one of them is from the so-called global south, but a lot of them are. Whereas we see that none of the spacefaring countries ever signed or ratified it so far. So I'd start with this and throw in the ball, and I look forward to other weigh-ins.
Yeah, if I may jump in, actually, I'll just basically subscribe to what you said. I also think that saying weakness might not be the most appropriate term. I feel it was mostly poor timing. On two accounts, the Moon Agreement first reflects a period which is aligned with the movement of the new international economic order, which was also important, for instance, in the discussions regarding the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which also incorporates, for instance, the idea of resources of the deep sea bed as common heritage of humankind. But at the same time, I feel that the issue issue was that lack of political will to keep pursuing the Moon Agreement as a treaty. Because, for instance, when we reached the 90s and the Convention on the Law of the Sea was looking also doomed, or at least without the participation of the most relevant countries for deep seabed mining, for instance, there was a push from within the United Nations. Boutros Boutros-Ghali, the UN Secretary General, realized, okay, we are going to have this major treaty enter into force without the support of the United States, Russia, UK, Germany, etc. And we need states that will provide practice to show that a treaty is successful, right? This is also, there are some issues with this vision of international law, obviously, but it's true that if you don't have states that have practice, for instance, in the field of space activities, adhering to a treaty or ratifying a treaty, then the treaty can be considered doomed. But there was no, for instance, implementation agreement, because for the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, there was this push, there was a new round of negotiations, and by 1994, there was an implementation agreement that reshaped the principle of common heritage of humankind to be more, well, let's say market-driven. This didn't happen with the Moon Agreement. It was just left laying there, right? I usually say it left laying on the dark side of the Moon Agreement. It was just left there, and there was no political will. Maybe because, yes, it was too soon, but I don't like saying sometimes the term too soon. I like to say it was visionary. They envisioned the idea that, okay, if we need international legal regime for deep sea bed mining, we will need one for space resource activities as well. But yes, obviously some states didn't want to commit to that in the long run, besides the idea of we want to be at that table. So for me, it was this. It was just poor timing because there was another priority on the table that required renegotiating and more political will and more concentration, right? Because it was this idea that, well, the sea is on Earth and space is up there. We still have so much to do. Let's leave this aside.
Yeah, and I just want to jump off that point, and actually, I think what I've been thinking about recently, coming into this discussion is, again, I don't want to say weakness, but I actually would take it a step back and say the power of the Outer Space Treaty. It's an incredible piece of international lawmaking, and actually, arguably, was too successful when it came to the children treaties, and especially the Moon Treaty. So you get an awful long way, for just using Article 2 of the OST. And again, we've touched on timing, and I think just the point I want to jump off on, I've been to space conferences recently, and hear people, say the OST wasn't ahead of, wasn't vision. The law I think you have to go back and think about your history. People were thinking when the OST was getting drafted, we were gonna have moon bases by the 80s, and the 2001 A Space Odyssey. So people really were thinking, very, thinking futuristically here, things that again were way behind considering what the vision was in the 60s. Those deep thought about how are we going to manage ourselves in space and the moon in particular. So I would kind of flip it around and say, not, maybe not, I don't know, maybe there is a particular witness, but I think a lot of the limelight, as it were, was stolen by the Outer Space Treaty, which has all the appropriate language for moon and other celestial bodies. So those, and again, almost it's by its success, major spacefaring nations ratifying that you were always, the timing was never going to quite work, and you get most of the way to where you want to be, at least at the start. So those are sort of my my early thoughts there.
I would definitely agree about timing and political will, which is a good segue to the next question, actually. Do you think countries today would ever agree to something like the Moon Treaty? And why or why not? Do you think political will would be different in today's climate, or how would it be different, in your opinion?
I think what we've seen for a couple of years now, if not even a decade, is that a lot of countries prefer to go the soft law route instead of like a hard law, treaty law route. Not always, it depends, but in a lot of cases, we are in an era where guidelines and principles instead of treaties rule our activities, especially in space. And so I cannot say exactly if Moon Treaty 2.0 or a renamed, repackaged treaty that would deal with that would necessarily succeed on one hand because of that. And then I'm sure we're gonna get that in the later part of the discussion. But we also have the Artemis Accords, which are, while not a legal document as such, they're a political agreement, but they are shaping themselves to be some sort of a baseline that a lot of countries are now getting behind. So why would we need a duplicate for that? From a very pragmatical point of view, if a country already said, I'm going to adhere to this set of principles, whether they're legally binding or not, or however whatever the characteristic it has, why would I sign another one that potentially maybe even has higher consequences when you compare it to a political agreement like the Artemis Accords? So I would say, I wouldn't say a hard no, but based on what I'm observing, I'd say a treaty wouldn't be the way forward. But maybe a guideline, maybe a soft law approach of any other shape would be the way forward, and maybe that would rile the countries behind it.
I'm not sure if we are keeping the same segue of speakers, but so I think I always say this because when we look at the general level, I always say that, okay, because in space law, a lot of people start to think of space law as this, independent branch, which in a form, in a manner it is, but it's part of international law. And international law in general is facing this view precisely that we are not getting hard law approved. We are looking at soft law mechanisms. We're also looking at a very different time in international law. I feel the international law of cooperation was left there in the early 2000s, where we had the ISS, for instance, is a perfect example, where we had the International Criminal Court statutes, etc. Now we have an international law that it's not necessarily looking into cooperation. We speak a lot of cooperation, but it's not necessarily doing that. It's more managing competition again. And this is why, for instance, we have Artemis and we have another set of states looking at the International Lunar Research Station, although we don't know exactly what the legal principles managing that or what the legal basis will be like for that. But for instance, I would say that we just need to look at Scopus, right? So I always say that the object and scope of the Moon Agreement is, of course, to specify legal principles for activities on celestial bodies, but also mainly for issues like space resources. And in Scopus, we are slowly moving towards space resource activity principles, right? We have the zero draft on space resource activities, the zero draft for legal principles that we will have at some point in 2027. So I would say that a hard law instrument, it's very difficult to get approved. And also you can ask, I think most law of the sea lawyers will tell you that if the UNCLOS was negotiated today, they wouldn't be able to approve it as it is. So, I mean, it seems to me that we also won't get this for space.
Yeah, and again, I have to agree. I think it's fairly, I think any multilateral treaty making ability right now in the current geopolitical context is incredibly hard. And I think that kind of the good news, or the good news, if you want to, is that bodies like UN COPUOS realize this. And, I think anything that approaches any of the five current, UN space treaties is not really being discussed in that way. So, are you going to? Yes, I think my quick answer would be no, with the kind of the slight spin of we've obviously got other, we've touched on the soft law route, absolutely, and then what is coming, I think, is then the key question that we can discuss and is getting very interesting.
I think the key point definitely is about soft law coming to the forefront. I think it seems that states like the element of flexibility, and especially in commercial space, they want the opportunities, they want the innovation more than anything else, which I guess is unfortunate for treaty making, but I guess we'll see how it pans out as commercial space grows. Um, next question is kind of similar. Do we think there would be any possibility of a revision of the Moon Treaty? Do we think there's any hope for it in that sense?
Oh, can I start on this one actually? Because I actually have, I've always had this position. If you want it to be, I always say this, if you want it to be modernized, it wouldn't be the Moon Agreement anymore. For instance, if we look back into 2002, the International Law Association had a report on this. The Space Law Committee addressed this issue of what do we need to change in the Moon Agreement to make it more acceptable. One of the suggestions was we get away with the concept or the legal principle of common heritage of humankind, which I say might be the only way of getting back the Moon Agreement, but at the same time, it wouldn't be the Moon Agreement anymore. It's a key element. Also, the Moon Agreement was, as I said previously, drafted in a context. If you take out this element, which is precisely, as it has been highlighted already, that we want to have this balance between non-spacefaring and spacefaring nations, then basically you're creating a new legal instrument, because the Moon Agreement itself would be devoid of its main purpose, right? So, but there is a way of modernizing it, and we actually are kind of witnessing it. We are witnessing this view of picking parts of the Moon Agreement, either to the zero draft on space resources, or, for instance, we also have the Hague building blocks, which are as incorporations of views that we have in the Moon Agreement, right? But to do this, in my view, would just basically mean creating a new legal instrument, or at least it would be the same treaty with the same name, but just not the same purpose.
Yeah, I think I'll go in and say, yeah, I would agree with that. In some ways, yeah, we are in a different regime, both technologically and geopolitically, I think, even than the 80s, for example. But what I think can be interesting, or just the little thought that's, and people are obviously talking about this as well. This is not just me saying this, but I think you can make progress, and in so much as if the question is could our Moon Treaty be or could there be a multilateral effort that regards the moon? I think something such as lunar standard time, or position navigation timing, PNT, telecommunications, the ITU, for example, is one of the most, encompasses all the states and is a well-known, well-respected international body. So that, I think there are roots in that there will be modernization that does allow for innovation, for countries for states to feel that they're participating in an equitable way. And again, as I say, something like this, there could be quite a specific or relatively specific Luna's particular telecoms issue that you might get some coherence on. So there could be modernization of a Moon Agreement, but I don't think you're going to modernize the Moon Treaty per se.
My 2 cents on this topic would be also that the approach, or better say, the way this modernization would happen would have to be reconsidered. What we've seen now, of course, all these 5 treaties were conceptualized in COPUOS, where we have member states sitting, as well as observers that are mostly intergovernmental, and NGOs, for example, simply because at that time these were the most relevant players. But now we see the ascent of commercial players that are sometimes even the most vocal ones. Whether that's right or not right, that's another topic for discussion. But still, I think the shifting in the power is happening too in that sense. And we cannot oblige commercial space to abide by a set of rules that they were not included in when these rules were being made, because they're the ones who are developing the methodology to explore the moon. It's not necessarily just the states that are doing this nowadays. It's private enterprises, big or small, that are coming up with innovative approaches, and they should be consulted on the rule that would be binding to them, because otherwise they'd say, well, I mean, you never asked me. I do not see how this is even applicable. So having all relevant stakeholders behind the same desk, I think, is the key here, to have something that people, meaning, of course, countries, enterprises, individuals, whoever is entangled in this activity, that they would actually be willing to continue and abide by it. Otherwise, we have a document that is trying to be resurrected, but ultimately fails again.
Yeah, I would agree completely. I think all of your points are exactly what I think about it too. Um, I think I do want to rephrase this next question. Um, More, how do we think that countries who have not gone to space, how should they have a say in how the moon is used? What kind of mechanism should that look like, whether the Moon Treaty or otherwise?
Well, I can start here and say, um, well, I guess yes, that's my first thought. I'm just getting my thoughts in order. That I guess there's two things going on here. The countries that have had space activity is actually now very large. So, there's a considerable number of countries, of states that have had small satellites or have had to understand, uh, international space law or liabilities. So I think that in some ways that is a quite a broad umbrella now, which is good. Obviously, the number of countries that have endeavored to go to the moon is still is a smaller subset of that, but it still now is growing and actually kind of rapidly growing. Um, and I do think in this regard, you kind of use all the levers of power that you have available. So I think this, you can go via the multilateral routes, UN COPUOS, and that's still a very powerful mechanism. That these are still great discussions that happen at that level. You can go unilaterally, and some states will obviously do that. And then there's the sort of what we're getting into the competing Artemis and ILRS uh, groups, which again, which do I guess to come back, and some Artemis countries, you might be surprised of who signed up there, kind of with obviously the vision that they will be key spacefaring partners in the future. So I guess that's a bit of a long, I'm not sure exactly how, but I think that the list of a lot of people are very interested.
Maybe another point to think about, how could those who maybe lack in capabilities, whether that's financial, technology-wise, labor-wise, whichever holds them back, maybe going the regional route could be the answer for them. So, of course, in Europe we have the European Space Agency, who is involved in many different programs, either of their own or in collaboration with others. And now, actually, very recently, we've seen the establishment of the African Space Agency. And while they are a very young organization, and it's still remains to be seen how exactly they're gonna function, still there might be a way for those who lack in whatever it is that they lack that prevents them to be a spacefaring nation, or to actually go to the moon, or be involved in lunar activities, to maybe bandwagon with the rest of its teammates from the region, if you could call it like that, and still contribute to it in a different way. And again, there are always, cooperations between individual space agencies that are an option too, and through that, then of course also the private and public space sectors within these two or several different countries that are involved in a multilateral partnership, that they could get involved and then have a say in how the moon is used by actually using it, so to say.
I'm actually here. I am going to sidetrack a bit from the question, because it's not only states that haven't gone to space or don't have space capability, at least not in the traditional sense of having physical presence there, that you have a saying. It's more than that. And it has been said precisely that companies need, and Corpus is looking to establish the Space Bridge Initiative. I'm actually unsure of how it's unfolding, that connects commercial actors to Corpus directly and gives them a saying at the table, but more than that, because the state doesn't always represent all its citizens, right? So and I feel very strongly that we need, for instance, the opinion of indigenous communities as well, because we look, and this is the mainstream narrative that we have, is that the moon is going to be used in this very exploitative way, but there are other ways of looking at the moon, of looking into space. Really, we always feel that any space activity somehow for the betterment of humankind and for the furthering of us as species, but that's not always true. And one of the many important aspects of space is space as an aspiration, as an idea of collectiveness, right? So I feel like, for instance, it's very important to give indigenous communities, which have been looking to space for millennia, and a seat at the table to say also how the moon is supposed to be used and space is supposed to be used. So I know that I've kind of sidetracked the question here, but it's really because I feel that it's very important to discuss, in this specific case, the moon more than just an object that we are going to exploit and going to be used. We need to discuss the moon as humankind as a whole. We need to discuss space as humankind as a whole. And states don't always represent either their population, or states collectively are not always the voice of humankind.
I think it's a good point. I don't think it's a sidestep, honestly. It's still talking about the inclusivity of making sure that the moon is being protected and used in a way that everyone can use and protect it. I think it's a good point. Nic, were you saying something? Did I cut you off there?
Sorry, I just think this issue, is incredibly important and timely, and came to a head beginning of last year with the Peregrine mission and the Navajo Nation, and so just understanding that interaction, this is not a futuristic conversation. This is an absolute timely and pivotal conversation that has to be engaged with.
Yeah, absolutely. So who should be in charge of making decisions about the moon? Now, obviously we have Copulus, but do we think that there should be anything specialized for the moon? Should we have some sort of like way of splitting it between countries? What do we think about that as a concept?
Well, what I wouldn't want to see, let's call it like that, is additional bureaucratization in this area, because just because we want to regulate something, of course, having specialists on the matter within one group that deals with that is very useful. But just establishing something new for the sake of, accomplishing some sort of a mandate, may risk actually preventing us to reach that goal in a timely manner. We've seen lately, in the last decade, really, that technology develops much faster than it used to. So oftentimes when we start working on some sort of a project, so to say, if that would be making decisions about the moon, some sort of a regime, by the time we get there, there are already so many things that have happened that this regime is potentially even obsolete. So I wouldn't say there is necessarily a need for a new body. I would say what we were answering in the what we were discussing within the scope of the previous question, it's about the relevant stakeholders that need to be involved, not necessarily a new body, a new task force, or whatever it is. It's to enhance the scope of and to hear out the opinions of those who are interested in going to the moon or in exploring the moon, exploring the space, who have valuable insights to that matter, or even those who don't but still are interested in it or have a history of dealing with it, whether that comes from their culture or from their heritage. So that I would flip the question around a little bit and answer it in a different manner.
I can also pick up on it. I feel that, for instance, one common thing we tend to do is to look at what happened on Law of the Sea and say because we have the International Seabed Authority, but at the same time, the International Seabed Authority, as for decades, been discussing precisely how deep seabed mining is supposed to take place under an international regime. They have already made some progress, but there's still a lot of discussion to be had left. And I agree that if we take a lot of time, I also don't. This is also the same thing. There's things that I don't want to see as well, which is we take a lot of time and activities on celestial bodies or in situ or physically there just start in a very deregulated manner, and then it will be much more difficult to regulate them and to create standards because who wants to say yes to new rules if you already are doing something without rules? And at the same time, what I don't want to see is things to be left upon. I'm not saying that we have to centralize decisions. I'm just saying I don't want to be seeing things left upon national states alone. So each state will make decisions and etc. because I feel it will create a lot of unnecessary competition and attrition, and so might not be our best solution. I always say, despite discussions on what legally means saying that space is global commons, I say always that common space, common solutions. If we leave things to specific camps, to only unilateral views, it will be much more difficult to achieve common solutions. We will achieve provisional solutions that will sometimes be better for some, not the others, right? So I feel like who should make decisions. I'm not saying also that we need to create a new intergovernmental organization, especially because, as we discussed before, and I also agree, we need to broaden the number of actors having a saying, therefore informing decisions. So maybe we start kind of with what we have now within the United Nations and try to move from there.
Yeah, I think again all these points are excellent, and in some ways I don't have much to add. That said, I'll say two very general things, but again quite maybe far-reaching, and almost by nature, I think when when you start using language such as in charge, I think, and again I know this is not getting into not meant, but it's very interesting that we have lots of examples here on Earth of what not to do and how not to form power dynamics and power and organizations or uh, ways of doing something for the where the moon is quite a novel territory, but we've got lots of experience of how not to put form situations of badly managed colonial aspects that will no doubt rear their heads again. Um, and the other point that I know other folks have mentioned as well, that I think, and probably been maybe not in the next few years or maybe not in the next decade, but there'll be a very, it is not inconceivable that very shortly, if there is going to be a more permanent presence on the base on the moon from moon bases, that humans will start being born on the moon. And I think then at that point, who's in charge of the moon is an incredibly difficult and complex discussion. But one that again is not out of the realms of possibility for any situation. So the long answer or the short answer here is I don't know.
I think unfortunately a lot of the answers are that we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty, especially thinking about the possibility of humans being on the moon, like you just said. Um, but I think it's definitely an interesting thing to think about in general. Um, so the next question, more of a specific question to do with the treaty. Is the treaty's prohibition of sovereignty claims obsolete or still a necessary safeguard against neocolonialism in space? Do we think it's still a concern? Do we think it's relevant? Do we think it's helpful?
Yes. I will start on this one for a very simple reason. And I will look into the Outer Space Treaty, Article 2. Article 2 is what is called jus cogens norm, or that is to say, a parentary norm of international law. It's this idea of, let's call it, sacred norm. It can only be, pushed away by a norm of equal value. Otherwise, this is the fundamental rule of space, law of space in general space activities. I feel it is absolutely a necessary safeguard because precisely, I would like to say that we tend to learn from history, not to repeat the mistakes, but sometimes I wonder if that's actually what we do, or we just find smarter ways of making the same mistakes. But yeah, obviously, I feel it's super necessary because otherwise we would have a race for sovereignty. And I've heard this actually. I've heard the claim. I've read it in a scientific article even, but I've read the claim of we should scrap Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. And when I read it, I was absolutely shocked, and I thought to myself, the minute we did that, we would have a new space race, and this one would be very different from just being for honor and science. It would become a land grabbing race in space. So for me, absolutely, we need it. Also, it's very difficult to push it away because it's, for me, the fundamental norm of the entire system of space law. If we take out Article 2 or if we take out the non-appropriation principle, you take out everything.
Yeah, and here another point to be made, besides the inevitable land grabbing, if we actually if we took out the non-appropriation principle and basically this prohibition of sovereignty claims, it's not just that, it could become a security matter, and it would be a matter of time, really. It's not that unusual if a country who has a space force would decide to use it to enforce some sort of a whatever they perceive as a security threat. And what we see again in the Artemis Accords, if I go to that document, again, not a legal treaty, it's a political agreement, but it is a way that showcases what is the interpretation of some of the principles of the Outer Space Treaty. And there we have the whole part about harmful interference and preventing harmful interference and safety zones, and how these safety zones would enable us to prevent harmful interference. Yet we don't really know what that harmful interference is in the scope of Artemis Accords. So what does prevent us or another country or whomever to claim, okay, you erecting a territory, an extraterrestrial outer space territory, was against my country's security, or it was a security threat, and now I'm acting upon it. So it's not just about making yourself more powerful, it's about the international security that this could potentially even endanger. So definitely keep it in from my point of view.
Yeah, so I think to the point of the question, is the treaty's prohibition of sovereignty claims obsolete? I'd probably have to say yes as well. I think, yeah, I just don't see how this works, or has, I don't see quite how this goes. But the discussion, and again, that I think this discussion again, that was so nicely, mentioned about the safety zones from Artemis. I have to admit, I've never fully understood this about how this is supposed to kind of work in practice. And what again, the kind of how that's going to be interpreted, or what this means, and how that's not then linked into to sovereign claims. As I say, I've always had a bit of a block, or not quite understanding this in more detail. But I just want to emphasize again, I really do, that this discussion is timely, or if we're not, well, a little bit behind. This is coming. The land grab has started. I think we should be clear about that. And how this manifests itself, I think is well, it might be again a commercial entity rather than a state entity that decides this. I don't know, but it's happening now.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. I think it's not adequate, but we need it for sure. I'm conscious of time, so I think we should open the floor for questions. I think we have a few already, so I'll stop sharing and we can look at those. So someone has asked, what about businesses solely established and operated on the moon? Should we have another treaty to address that? What are your thoughts on that as an idea?
I think what we can get back to again is the timeliness that we would need, whatever we would need in order to regulate activities on the moon, especially for those who are already quite advanced. Just recently, it was 2 days ago, right? We almost witnessed a lunar rover land, backed completely, almost, if not by a commercial enterprise. So definitely necessary. But if it's necessarily a treaty, I wouldn't say so. What we've seen from soft law example, and here I'm maybe going to the case of deorbiting rules, right? We do not have a legally binding document or legally binding standard that says how long after end of mission you need to deorbit. But what we do see is that a soft law standard, which is 25 years post-mission, you need to that trickles down into regional and national legislation. So it's not that the countries or individuals or enterprises would just say, oh, just because there is no treaty, I can it even further, but rather something that majority of us can get behind. And if that is a very generic baseline on top of which we can then build as activities are getting even more involved, more evolved, I think that might be the way forward. But again, I'm no expert, and I think it remains to be seen. I think that's the answer here, unfortunately.
I think there's also an aspect here which is, well, for business that are, if this idea that a business starts and established on the moon, let's say it, if it loses a nationality link to a certain state, because we have the Outer Space Treaty, Article 6, that establishes, the state responsibility even for private endeavors, based on this view of national space activities. So I wonder if maybe, and I agree, for the time being, I don't see it as super necessary unless we reach that point in time where we have, settlements that are fully independent of Earth in some way, shape, or manner, and you have businesses that are not connected to any state. Because so far as it is possible to establish a nationality link, and I'm looking at this solely from the issue of responsibility in international law, but solely from this point of view, it wouldn't be needed because you have a link to a certain state, which is then responsible in terms of international law.
Yeah, I think these are, again, great points and great discussions, and thanks again for the questions. I think I'd be a bit remiss what I did, I was thinking beforehand. I just want to make a couple of very, very broad points. And again, as I say, coming from sort of the aspect of long-term sustainability or just process. And I just want to say a couple of things that, I would say the thing that concerns me most about space sustainability is the moon. It's not space debris or atmospheric destruction or anything like that. It's the activities that we carry out on the moon for a couple of very simple reasons. And the first is that the moon doesn't have, weathering or erosion like on Earth. And so what your activity has a very, very long lasting consequence. And we've crashed a lot of satellites and a lot of rovers into the moon already. There's a lot of junk that's already on the moon. If you just go to Wikipedia and look at the list, and again, there was another, as I say, was mentioned this week. So it's a very harsh, but it's a very, very delicate environment. And so I think all these discussions sort of have to, it really is another world you're now thinking of. And so I think, be it, and I'm not again convinced you're going to have a multilateral treaty here, but thinking of how you regulate state or economic enterprise, I think you do have to really take that into account. And I would say the second thing is actually in some ways, and again, there's a couple of nice kind of pictures if you just, the moon's actually quite small in some ways. It's not a huge area per se. It's bigger than a garden, but it's not a huge area. And so it's definitely a very finite resource, and especially the areas of interest, lunar South Pole, that you might be concerned about. So I think these are all when these kind of very practical or different aspects than when thinking about terrestrial activities. So again, I don't have any direct answers, but I think those are the things that I often think about or kind of think have to be considered.
I think that link between sustainability and business probably has to be considered more heavily in general, but also with the moon. I think it's, as you said, it's delicate, it's tricky, but it's something we should be thinking about. I am very conscious of the time we're at on the hour at this point. I'm so sorry that we won't have time to go through any more questions. Um, Thank you to the three of you for discussion. Thank you for everyone for being here. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us, inviting me to be a part of this panel. If any of you have further questions, feel free to connect on LinkedIn and definitely stay curious and keep on asking questions. That's how we got where we are right now.
No, thank you, folks. Thank you, Toby. And likewise, please reach out. Yeah, easy to find on LinkedIn should be. And no, delighted it flew past. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your attention and time, everyone.
Same thing. It was really a super fast 1 hour. Thanks for the invitation, Toby, and the SGAC. And yeah, same thing. It's the same name on LinkedIn that you should see on your screen. Feel free to reach out.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone.